What is going on, YouTube? Fascinating graveyard in a fascinating neighborhood, if I do say so myself. Today we're in Pikeville, Kentucky, and we're here to visit the grave of Octavia Hatcher. She is known as the woman that was buried alive. Or was she? Well, let's explain the story. So we're going to go to January 4th, 1891. Octavia is pregnant with a baby. His name is going to be Jacob. So she goes to, I guess, the hospital or whatever women had their babies in back in those days, maybe at home. And the baby's born, but the baby died sadly a few hours later. And that drove Octavia into a very, very dark place in her mind. She became very, very depressed. She stopped eating. She stopped socializing with her friends. It really, really tore her life apart. And quite soon afterwards, within about a few months, she started getting sick. Now, back in those days, when you got sick, it could have been one of a couple things. It could have been yellow fever. It could have been consumption, which is known now as tuberculosis. So we're not quite sure what she was sick with, but what we do know is that sadly, in the beginning part of May, she died from her illness, and she was buried in this very cemetery. Now, her husband, James, was a very well-to-do businessman. He owned a couple businesses in town, and he owned quite a bit of land in this area. And after she died, there was this supposed, like a swooning sickness type illness that was going around in the area where people would fall into this deep sleep, almost like a coma. But then they would wake out of it. It was almost like they were dead. But they were not, they were alive. And Octavia's husband, James, had a thought. He said, what if my wife was not really dead? What if the funeral was all for naught? And he started having these nightmares of his wife being buried alive. So one afternoon, he paid some grave diggers to disinter his wife. And when they brought her coffin up and they opened it, a ghastly sight before their very eyes. It was this contorted, horrid look of anguish and fear in Octavia's eyes. The lining to her coffin had been ripped to shreds, and her fingernails were basically bloody and ripped to the bone. She was buried alive. This is her grave. The statue was commissioned by her husband and was placed about a year after her death. She was buried in this exact spot so she could look down upon a hotel that he once owned, which is down in that area right in front. Now, this is the grave of Octavia Hatcher. And this is her baby boy that only lived but a few hours. This is Jacob Hatcher. And this is her husband resting at her feet, James. United once again. He lived about 50, I want to say about 40 years or something, about 40 years after her death. No, 50 years, yeah, almost 50 years, about 48 years or so after her death. Now, here's what's wrong with this story. Now, this story is one of those urban legends that we don't really know if this happened. The general consensus is that it happened, except there's no newspaper articles detailing the story of what happened. That's the problem. So in my personal opinion, more than likely, this is an urban legend, and it is said that Octavia's spirit haunts this area, and at night you can see a mother out here crying for her baby. If you want to brave be brave. Come out here at night, you might run into Miss Hatcher. But regardless of if the story of her being buried alive is actually true or not, there is some documented cases, but it cannot be confirmed. I actually came out here about 1.5 years ago to do this video, and I accidentally deleted the file. So it took me 1.5 years to come back out here, but I'm glad I did, because regardless of the fact what happened to her, it is still a very, very sad story of a young woman giving birth to a baby, and the baby only lived not but a few hours. Yeah, that statue was quite expensive to have made. Yeah, you didn't have stuff like that made back in those days unless you had deep pockets. So anyways, the Hatcher family together once again. So rest in peace to all. Okay, guys. I hope you enjoyed that very quick story. I'll see you on the next vlog. Peace out.